Got it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Hello, and welcome back to How I Healed podcast. On today's podcast, I will be speaking with my co host, Mary Lou Singleton, about her healing journey. On the last episode of How I Healed, you heard from me, you heard about my healing journey. And today we're diving in with Mary Lou. Before we get started, I do want to take a moment to say thank you to everybody who has tuned in so far. The feedback has been incredible to receive. It has been such a joy to start this project. And Mary Lou, doesn't it just feel so aligned?
Yes. I'm really excited that we're doing this, Jocelyn. I think the
Yeah.
time is right for getting stories of healing out.
hmm Yes. And so, with that said, if you have a story of healing, please get in touch with us at howihealedpodcast@gmail.com to link up with us. You can also reach us on Twitter or Instagram, and our handles are in the show notes for that. So, without further ado, Mary Lou, are you ready?
I am
You ready
ready.
to go deep? Okay, so, I figure as a lifelong healer of others, I'm sure you have many incredible stories of healing, but today we're getting personal. So, what are we talking about here? Is
Yeah,
there a
no, go ahead.
well, just is there a specific story of healing in your life that you want to share?
My whole life is a healing journey, right?
I
So
figure.
yeah, but
So,
I
where are we
really
narrowing it down?
and we're never done, right? There's always something arising requiring us to get into better balance. But for I sat with it, and for this episode, I really wanted to talk about asthma and how I healed from asthma, because I think that's a very common chronic condition that a lot of people identify with and think they cannot heal from. And I am someone who was told I had asthma, believed I had asthma for a really long time, and I no longer have asthma or symptoms of asthma.
Yeah, and as we spoke about in our very first episode, once you get diagnosed with a chronic condition, you are written down in your medical records as an asthmatic
Mhm.
forever. And
Right. No.
the absence of
Yeah.
symptoms is irrelevant to the medical profession. So when did your symptoms first begin to manifest?
I had a lot of respiratory illnesses as a child. I came into this world with a lot of grief.
Mm.
My mother's mother died a year and a day before I was born. So she died on Christmas in 1968. I was born the day after Christmas, 1969. So I gestated in my mother's grief. That was my prenatal time. And for anyone familiar with Chinese medicine, the lungs are the site of the seat of grief. In that paradigm of healing, every organ has an emotion associated with it, or a state associated with it, and grief resides in the lungs. So from that perspective, it's not unsurprising that I had weak lungs as a child. And that's what I was always told, like, oh, she has weak lungs, she has weak lungs.
You were
So,
told that by doctors?
no, I was told that by my family
Oh.
because I get respiratory illnesses really frequently. And
Mhm.
some of my first experiences that I remember as a child were being sick, having a hard time breathing, and my mother making a tent for me. She would call it an oxygen tent for me, but there was no oxygen involved. My mother was a nurse, and she was good at tending to me. And she was also really into Western medicine, and often had me on drugs, which was the way she knew how to take care of me. But I'd be very, very sick, coughing a lot, having a hard time breathing as a little child. And my mom would hang sheets from my canopy bed, put two vaporizers in there, put Vicks in the vaporizers, put Vicks vapor rub all over me. And I felt safe. I have to say, my mom was never freaking out. She was like, okay, we know how to deal with this. I never felt unsafe. I never felt like anybody thought I was going to die because I couldn't breathe very well. But I did get a lot of attention from my mother when I was sick. And
Ah.
my mother had three children in 3 years. I was the middle of those. We were not particularly bonded. And I think that got imprinted in me as a child, that you get love and affection and devotion from your mother when you can't breathe very well.
Wow, that is deep and it makes so much sense.
So yeah, it does make sense, right? And then the first time I heard the word asthma, I think I was 8 or 9. It was Halloween, and I had we were out trick-or-treating, and I had this really crazy plastic mask. I think it was a ghost mask, but this is the 70s. It was some like horrible off-gassing plastic. It was over my face. And we just made it to the very first house, and I could not breathe. Like, I was wheezing. I couldn't breathe. It was cold out, but it was from the gases coming off that mask. Because I just remember the smell of it was, it felt like I was breathing in poison and I couldn't breathe. And we were only one house in the neighborhood. So my dad like left my brother and sister at the neighbors who we knew and took me back home and was like, oh, she's having a hard time breathing. And my mom said the word asthma for the first time. So I think I was 8. It was like somewhere between 7 and 10, but I think I was on the younger end of that. And that's where asthma as a word and identity became part of my life. And back then in the 70s, there was like the Primatene mist inhaler. I didn't have, I don't remember going to the doctor for my asthma except to get steroids. My mom would give me steroid pills. And that, it just continued through my childhood. And then I, like a lot of people do, I also had eczema, like really severe eczema at the time, which those are paired conditions.
Are they?
In allopathic medicine, we call them atopic conditions. So it's ATOPY. You're an atopic child. If you asthma, hay fever, and eczema are the atopic triad is how it's called. So I had the atopic triad. I had very bad seasonal allergies. I had lots of eczema, and I had asthma. That was my belief about myself.
Wow. Okay. So since you have become a medical professional, have you, discovered any stronger link between these atopic afflictions? Like why they would always manifest together? Is there a pattern in the literature or in your own practice?
It's a pattern of overreaction in the immune system with all of those, which we talked about a little bit in the first episode of just, I think of that, of how not feeling safe in this world, identifying things that aren't a threat as a threat. And I mean, anyone who's spent a lot of time with me, I mean, I would agree that I'm a somewhat overreactive person. Like, that's kind of my baseline. The joke in my family is my MO is freak out first, investigate later. So I'm working on that. I'm obviously not healed from that yet, and I would like to heal that. that was being reflected in my immune system of, here's something coming in, let's overreact. Yeah. The atopic conditions, they're considered hereditary. I grew up in a family where people just were like, oh, we all have allergies. We all have asthma. We all have not so much asthma. We all have hay fever and eczema. So that was the story in my mom's family, that we were all allergic people. Yeah, so that was my childhood. Lots of colds that turned into what used to be called chest colds, lots of wheezing, lots of coughing, lots of getting love and affection and devotion from my mom when I couldn't breathe well. So, yeah.
I'm immediately reminded of the German New Medicine paradigm, which is that allergies are expressions of a track. And so the reason that you continually get the same allergies over and over is they share the trigger is shared in common, and you essentially express this every time you have the same trigger. And so as you're describing, you can get love from your mother when you express this very specific thing. It just seems so obvious that your very intelligent healing body, your wise body, was like, yeah, of course, this is how we get the love that we need.
Right.
I think it's also interesting. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to back up and say that again, I'm the middle child of 3 children who were all basically the same age, like we're all a year apart. And my birth was not great for me or my mother. And my mom would always describe my birth as she wanted to have a natural birth. She wasn't allowed. She was given general anesthesia against her will, even though her labor was progressing really quickly. And that I was born under the effects of the anesthesia and needed to be resuscitated. So my very first breath in this world was not easy. Like I had a forced breath. I was born not having a suppressed breathing reflex by major anesthetic drugs. And then I was taken to the nursery, and I was again born the day after Christmas. They were very short staffed. And my mom would always tell this story like wistfully with like this sadness that she was to say, "Oh, I didn't see you for 3 days. It took 3 days for them to bring you to me." And not because I was sick, but because I kept forgetting. And so I was just in a little plastic box, like by myself, having, bottles propped probably for the first 3 days of my life. So I came in unconscious, like knocked out. I had to be assisted in breathing. I was going to say forced to breathe, but it was, I did not have easy first breaths. And then I spent the first 3 days of my life away from my mother in a plastic box in a nursery. And so that was the template of my relationship with my mother. We never bonded. We didn't bond.
Wow.
Again, it's the late 60s. Women were being told breastfeeding was bad for babies. Like that particular hoodwinking is so upsetting to me, that women were actually told breast milk was less than ideal for their babies. It wasn't good. We have this space age new invention called formula, this very scientific, it's a formula. It's standardized. It's a scientific formula. It's not like some mysterious secretion of women that we have no idea what's going on there. This is scientific. So my mom did not breastfeed me at all. And that was another missed bonding opportunity for us. And then she had a 1-year-old at home. I was her second baby at the same time. And then she had my brother just a year later. So we weren't close. My mother and I were not close. And again, like most of my memories of my mother really loving and caring for me individually were around times I was sick.
Wow.
And I think that that's a common template for many people with chronic illness, that there's a secondary gain to expressing illness.
Attention being primary. Yeah. Getting the love and attention that you need. And I also feel like there's a lot of boundary setting in chronic illness, because you have an excuse to say what your needs are. If you are in a family constellation where expressing your needs is difficult because they will not be met, or they'll be met with suspicion, or you don't deserve that, or you haven't earned that, then it's a great way to really double down and say, nope, I need this. This is exactly like the amount of attention that I'm going to get.
Yeah. Right. So that was my childhood. Through puberty. I was covered in eczema. I had frequent respiratory infections that presented with a lot of wheezing. I had some wheezing with exercise, but I don't remember that being such an issue. I remember not being able to keep up with other kids quite as well, like feeling I had like lower lung capacity, but there was less of this concept of exercise induced asthma back then. It was mostly.
I was going to ask, were you athletic at all?
No, I wasn't really athletic. I was a thinker. I was an intellectual. I was kind of tracked that way. No, I wasn't very athletic, but we played a lot outside. Like there wasn't, we run around and did a lot of like walking and hiking, but I was never a runner. I could never run well. I just would feel very short of breath pretty quickly into it. So that the times were different in how that was treated. And then when I went through puberty, like many cases, it went into remission. Like I didn't, in my adolescence, I rarely had bad respiratory illnesses. My eczema was completely manageable. I had to have like a couple of patches. I wasn't covered in it anymore. And then started smoking when I
Oh
was
my God.
16.
I can't imagine you as a smoker, Mary Lou.
I loved smoking. I was a big time cigarette smoker.
Wow.
Yeah, I was really into it. And
You're a baddie.
all the cool kids were doing it, Jocelyn.
Oh, I know. I started when I was 16.
Right. And again, this was like the 80s. Like you could smoke in the grocery store. Like
Mm.
you could smoke. There was a smoking section on the airplane. Like there was a smoking and non-smoking section in restaurants. Like it was ridiculous. You could smoke anywhere. We pretended that you could smoke on the airplane and it would stay in the smoking section.
Yeah.
So in the 80s, like there was much less stigma. Cigarettes were cheap. You could get them in a machine. You didn't even need an ID, like $1 a pack, and you just, get them at the machine. And it wasn't too hard to get fake IDs back then. Things were really different. So I became a smoker at 16, and I smoked. Like I really, really smoked. I feel like tobacco got me through some really hard times, and
Bringing
that
us back to the grief,
right.
right?
Exactly. Because at the same time, my mother had been diagnosed with cancer. She had both a melanoma and she had colon cancer, and she had metastatic colon cancer and possibly metastatic melanoma. And I just was so young. I don't even realize, I don't even remember what kind of cancer she had, but she had cancer all through her body. And those were the two places that they said it had started from. And so my mom, who I didn't get along with because we'd never bonded and we fought constantly, is now dying of cancer. And I don't know how to process that because we fight all the time and we don't ever have a good time together. And I'm completely devastated that she's dying. And the cigarettes became a way of self-medicating during that incredible time for me. Thankfully, I was a really motivated kid and I was a really academically talented kid. And I had known from the time I was really little that my brain was my ticket out of town, and that I was really focused on getting good grades and getting into a good school and getting the hell out of Dodge, and getting away from the little town I was raised in. So I didn't become an alcoholic. I didn't do hard drugs. Probably I'm also, because I'm an anxious person, like I was afraid to do hard drugs, like that seems scary to me, like, oh, I don't know, I might die if I do that. So my addiction kind of stayed at tobacco. And yeah, so I started smoking a lot, and then my lungs weren't doing so well anymore, and I got re-diagnosed with asthma. I said, oh, it came back because I was smoking a lot. And I went to college, which was great. My mom is dying. I go to college across the country. I'm at this like great liberal arts college. It's late 80s. Like you can do anything. Like it's there's so much freedom, really, in that Generation X sweet spot of freedom, and I loved college. And I was a chain smoker all through college, and I really got sick a lot. I just had a lot of respiratory illnesses. At that point, I had an inhaler. I sometimes had oral albuterol pills. They were giving those back then. That stuff, like if you're into speed, that stuff was
It's
bad.
like a steroid.
No, it's a stimulant. It's what's
Okay.
in the stimulant puffer. Um, yeah, like I could run when I took albuterol. Like, I could run like way beyond my fitness level, focus, all of that. So I was in and out of respiratory things in college, and then at when I was 21, no, I was 20. My mom let me know like she was going into hospice, and I was just like, I didn't know what to do with it. Nobody was really processing it with me. Like I didn't really have anyone to talk to. I didn't really understand all these feelings I was having, because I had a really hard relationship with my mom. Like we fought. We couldn't hang out for like 15 minutes without fighting. Like we just really did not get along, and she's dying. So in my junior year of college, when I was 20, I dropped out of college for a semester to go home and be with my mom during hospice and do some of her hospice care. And that was a big part of my healing. Like that
Mm.
was, yeah, that was really incredible. I still think, wow, that I'm so glad I had that gift to have that time with her. My mom was a nurse. She had been part of the hospice movement. Her best friend was a pioneer in hospice. My mom's sisters were all nurses and nuns. And so she had all of these women really providing excellent hospice care. You know, my aunts would come and just be with us. Her best friend, Dorothy Staub, I was an angel, and she was my mom's best friend, who was also a nurse, and just set us up. And I had that time with my mom I'm going to start crying, but for the first time in my life, I felt unconditional love with my mom.
Oh.
And it was so good to get that, that we could heal our relationship, and that we weren't fighting, and we were just present. And I got that bonding with her that I hadn't gotten when I was born, that the baby's born and she's perfect, and you love her so much, where my mom and I got really ripped off at our birth. Like it was disorienting for both of us. It was considered normal back then, so no one addressed like the level of trauma of not seeing your baby for 3 days and then just being given a baby like that's normal. And she didn't like feel connected to me, she didn't feel connected to me at all. And I think just her overwhelm and confusion, and then having another baby, like having a 1-year-old and a newborn, not having time to just be present with me and bond and skin to skin. Like she was just crazy busy with her other baby, and then having another baby the next year. So we just it was the first time we bonded on that just deep unconditional level. And I am so grateful for it. And then I spent all that time with her. We had that last Christmas. And then this, like the hardest thing I've ever been through happened, where I was in the kitchen, my mom's dying, like maybe it's going to be tomorrow, maybe it's going to be a while from now, but it's like she's on the threshold. She's on, it's up to her and when she's going to let go, but she's dying. She's actively dying. And I'm there at home, and I'm in the kitchen, and Dorothy Staub, my mom's best friend, came into the kitchen and said, I have to tell you something really difficult. I was like, well, what? Like, I know my mom's dying. Like, what is it?
What
like,
more?
Like, what's it going to be? And she said, it's really important to your mom that all her kids are on track. She can't let go because she's so worried about you, because you dropped out of school. And she said, you need to go back to school so your mom can die.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Wow. And it was, yeah. And I knew she was right. I know I wouldn't have gone back to college. Like it was then or never. Like my mom knew that this was her last act of really mothering me, of like guiding me. Like I'd never taken her advice. I just fought her my whole life. And this was her, mothering me on her deathbed. Like, you have to go back to college or you're not going to finish college. And then you might actually turn into a worse addict than a cigarette smoker, or who knows what will happen to you. But I can't be at peace until you're on track. Wow. And so, yeah, so I had to say goodbye to my mom, knowing I'd never see her again. And it was awful. And she was like trying to lie to me, saying, I'm going to get better. I'll see you in the summer. I'll be here. I'll be in the garden. And we both knew it was a lie, but like that she needed to say that, instead of admitting what was happening, that like I really was saying goodbye to my mom, like really consciously. And so yeah, flew back to school as a mess. I was covered in a rash. I like had eczema on my whole
eczema
body.
again.
Right. Yeah.
Oh no.
Coming out of my skin. I went to, like 2 days before I was leaving for college, knowing like what I was in for. I went to a doctor and like got a pap smear, which was just like awful and terrible. And this female doctor, she was like, so what's up? And I'm like, I'm a wreck. I'm covered in eczema. I can't sleep. My mom is dying. and she'd given me some kind of sleeping pills, probably Visceral or hydroxyzine or something. But so I had these sleeping pills. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think straight. I hadn't slept in like 4 days. By the time I got to college, I hadn't slept in 4 days. I'm covered in a rash. And I remember going to my registration for classes, because back then you had to go like register in person, like they set up everything in the gym and you had to walk around with your card and get approved for all your classes. And I couldn't even like think straight, and my card was like a crazy person had filled it out, like it wasn't in the lines. And I'd scratched out all these things. I mean, it just looked like a really deranged person had filled out this card with my classes on it. And then I walk over to my advisor, and he knows my mom's dying. He knows the story. He's my academic advisor. I'm at this tiny liberal arts college where everybody knows everybody. And he had approved me like dropping out to be with my mom. And he looks at my card and he just looks up at me, and I'm a mess. Like I haven't slept in 4 days. I have not slept in 4 days. I have like,
You're
my
legally
eyes are
insane.
crazy. Yeah, I'm like completely insane. And he looks at my card, he looks at me, he looks at my card again, looks at me again, and then he just signs my card. And I'm like, it's the next person's turn. Like that was our interaction. I was like, oh, I have to sleep. So I ended up like taking these sleeping pills, and it wasn't working, and I wasn't falling asleep, and I like way overdosed on my sleeping pills, which thankfully were not something, lethal. And I remember that night, like, the room was just bubbling. Like I was like, oh wow, I hope I wake up in the morning, because I just took a lot of drugs. And I did wake up. I started school. I was in my classes, and 2 weeks later, I get back from my work study job in the cafeteria, and there's a sticky note on my door that says, "Your mom died. Please call home right away."
I'm sorry, what?
I know, right? Right. That's how they dealt with it. And again, it's a tiny, expensive, top tier liberal arts college with 1,200 students. Somebody could have come and got me. My brother, who also was back in school, because we had both been given the same Herculean task of having to go back to college when our mom was on her deathbed. He was at a big state school, and they came and got him out of class, and showed him a bunch of compassion. Like, yeah, I had to get a ride to the airport. I had to fly home. My uncle picks me up at the airport, and he's like not a super emotional guy. He was my favorite uncle, but he like was not the guy you talk to about your feelings. I remember he got me at the airport. I'm in like my big parka, because I go to school in the Midwest. I'm like back, and he picks me up, and we're waiting for my luggage, and I lean up against this wall, and there's a wet paint sign I didn't see, and the whole back of my parka gets covered in paint. And I just like look at my uncle, and he takes my hand and said, "Mary Lou, we're just having one of those times."
I should say.
Wait, I go home, I go to my mom's funeral, I fly back, I have to get back to college, and I start really chain smoking, like really, really chain smoking. And that's when like I really start having a hard time breathing, and I start embracing this, like, oh, I have asthma, like I really have asthma, and I'm in it for the drugs, and I get the inhalers, and I get I really start identifying with this diagnosis. And then let's see what happened next.
Now, really quickly, as you're kind of coming up with what happened next, just tell me, because you had been diagnosed, you had been, your mother mentioned asthma at age 8, you started smoking at 16, so you came to truly identify with the asthma and be getting the drugs at the time of your mother's death, which was like in your early 20s, like 20-ish.
I had just turned 21.
21, but
21, yeah.
you didn't identify as asthmatic before. You just kind of dealt with it like as a, oh, sometimes I can't breathe kind of thing.
It was more casual, like a casual identification.
Just like a casual chronic illness.
Yeah, like, oh yeah, I have asthma, whatever, pass the bong, like
right. But then
like
once you were a chain smoker, then you were like, oh, it's the asthma.
The asthma. But and it wasn't really part of my identity. It was just like, oh yeah, I have asthma. Oh yeah, I'm wheezing because I have asthma. Like it wasn't that. But then after my mom died, as you can imagine, like I am in the throes of grief, and it just became a bigger part of my identity. Like, oh, I am an asthmatic. I didn't quit smoking. I mean, I smoking like 2 packs a day. I ran from my grief. Like I did not have time to grieve. I didn't understand grief. I felt like if I started crying, I would never come back. Like I was not getting anywhere near that infinite well of grief, like I was not going to do it. I was not going to do it. And so I really, I mean, I was smoking like 2 packs a day. I was drinking so much coffee. Like people say they're drinking a lot of coffee, but I had a coffee maker in my little apartment, and I would fill the filter to the top with coffee and make a 6-cup pot of coffee. Then I'd put that in a pitcher and make another one. And I drank both of those every day.
This.
I was
Well, I bet
drinking
you were really regular between all the smoking and the coffee.
smoking and the coffee. Yeah, I definitely was not constipated. That was not part of my identity.
You probably
Yeah,
had very little appetite too, though.
I don't even remember how I felt in my body. I was drinking a lot. I mean, I was drinking a lot of alcohol. I had a different guy in my bed every week. I was just like, like how can I not feel? Like, how can I wind it tighter? It was like how can I tighten this tourniquet around my heart so it doesn't start bleeding? Like I cannot feel it. I cannot feel it. So I was just, yeah, I was drinking. I was having a lot of just like dissatisfying one night stands. Because there certainly was no position to be like bonding with somebody at that point. I was smoking like crazy, drinking all that coffee, and still like getting decent grades at a top tier liberal arts college that required a lot of work. Like, was still getting my work done. I was, and I am a over intellectualizing person, just throwing myself into thinking as well. And yeah, and I was getting sick a lot. I really was having a hard time breathing. I was coughing all the time. And I remember I was living with my friends, Rachel and Suzanne, who are, just some of the best friends I've ever had. And just like those kind of friends that are so formative. And I would just cough and cough and cough and cough. And finally, Rachel came into my room one night, and she just sat on my bed. It was like in the morning. I guess she woke me up. I woke up and she was sitting on the bed. Because I was also like having all these waking nightmares and like having I was just having a lot of those, what do you call those, like those
Succubus.
yeah, like I was having
You're
demons.
about to fall asleep and then you have the feeling of being crushed beneath the
Yeah,
weight of
demons.
fear.
A lot of night. I was
Demons.
having a lot of sleep demons. I was my chest is tight, and when I talk about it, it was a really bad time. It was a really bad time. And yeah, so I woke up, and Rachel's sitting on my bed waiting for me to wake up. And she said, I listened to you cough all day and all night, and I can't handle being an observer to you hurting yourself like this anymore. And she used to call me, like, my nickname with her was Huckleberry Lou. She called me Huck all the time. She's like, Huck, what do we need to do? What do we need to do? And Rachel was very much a healer. She was so much
friend.
so much of who I am was because of my friendship with Rachel. Like, she was just such a formative friend and such a good friend. And she's like, what do we need to do? And I was like, I don't know. What are you talking about? Like, what needs to be done? Like, I was running, and she just started asking me about my mom and what I'd gone through. And really, I was just telling her the story. And at some point I was like on the floor, like I couldn't even like be on the bed anymore. I was like on the floor, and I just started crying. I'm telling the story and I'm just blubbering, and then I'm just crying. And it's the first time I've cried really since my mom died. And I can't stop crying, and I'm like shaking. I'm having a seizure because I'm crying so hard. There's like snot running out of my nose. I'm drooling everywhere. I felt like I was just a liquid mess on the floor, and it just kept going on. And I just remember at one point looking up at her where I'm just like racked with grief, and I'm terrified of like what is happening. And I said to her, I was like, what's happening to me? And she just reached over and like untangled something off my chest. And she's like, oh, you're just letting go, Huck.
Oh, yeah.
And I just cried and cried and cried and cried and cried. And that helped a lot, I mean, that really helped a lot. And I stopped smoking quite so much. I went down to like less than a pack a day. And I got a counselor to talk to. I started getting massages. I got a couple of older female advisors who were willing to help mother me. Like, this is so, it's like really, it's still right there, I'm so grateful to everybody who helped me. And I had this women's studies advisor, Bro, who really liked me. And she would let me come take baths in her clawfoot tub and just set me up with baths and just mothered me, she just mothered me. And a lot of women like started stepping in to just mother me, and I still I still got coughs and colds and stuff. But then, okay, so then I was doing better. I was healing. And then I fast forward to it, I moved to Albuquerque, and there's a lot more to my story. I got pregnant, had kind of an intense crisis pregnancy. I was a single mom from like the time the pregnancy test came back. And I had a lot of asthma during my pregnancy. Like, I had a lot of problems breathing during my pregnancy. And I was very rigid and dogmatic. I was not going to take any drugs. And I was even doing stuff like ephedra to deal with my breathing stuff, which I probably wouldn't recommend it's an herb. It's probably as safe as albuterol, but it's definitely not something you're supposed to recommend pregnant women take. And I ended up having a healthy term pregnancy, which I might not have if I'd been taking those drugs. And I had the baby. I had a really wonderful home birth, which was really wonderful and healing. And then 2 days after, I got bronchitis, 2 days after I gave birth, and was just coughing and coughing. And I like coughed out all my stitches. I was really, really sick right after I gave birth. But I'm a single mom. I'm on welfare. Like, I had to go to the welfare office the day after I gave birth, or I wasn't going to have food stamps and money. And I was doing, had a lot of support. Like, I had people who helped me a lot, but I didn't have family and I didn't have a partner. And I just started getting sick all the time, just all the time. And I was just having a really hard time breathing. And I went to the doctor for help with my asthma. So I was like 24 years old. And I just was having a really hard time breathing. I could barely blow into the spirometer. I couldn't like walk up a flight of stairs without using an asthma inhaler. And I kept going back to the doctor every 3 months saying it's not working. Like, I'm not controlled. That all the drugs are giving me, I'm still needing my rescue inhaler at least like 2 times a day. And they just kept upping my meds and upping my meds. And then at this point, I think I was already apprenticing as an herbalist, and I was trying to heal myself somewhat with herbs, and it wasn't really working that well. And I was starting to apprentice as a midwife. And so I'm immersed in that world thinking, how can I actually heal this? Is like, maybe I should start using herbs. Maybe I should do something else because these drugs aren't working. But I was afraid because I couldn't breathe. And I was afraid. I kept thinking the doctors could fix me. And my last visit with the doctor for asthma, I had this family practice doctor at UNM, and it's like the public health clinic. It's a really edgy place. Like, there are people, just a lot of, nobody there seems well. I wait like 5 hours. I go in for my visit, and she's like, okay, we'll try this other med. There's this new promising new drug, which of course is like pulled off the market now because it didn't work and it had all these side effects. I think it was called Tylate or something like that. And the look in her eyes, I remember looking at how she was looking at me and thinking, she thinks I'm going to die from this. Like, that's the look she's giving me, is she does not actually believe I'm going to get better. I have really severe asthma, and she thinks I'm going to die from this. And people die from this. It's like, oh wow, people die from this. And the drugs aren't getting me better. So what am I going to do? And I just kind of like, I left there, I drove away. I didn't have any faith in the drugs helping me. And I just kind of like prayed out, like, what could help me? And then I went to my midwifery apprenticeship, and this lovely woman, Janice Lotto, who had been the apprentice with my mentor, Barb Pepper, she had just finished her apprenticeship when I was coming in. She was going to DOM school. She was becoming an acupuncturist.
Oh,
And she's like, you look like you're not doing well. What's going on? I was like, I'm getting sicker and sicker with asthma. And she's like, hey, come to the acupuncture clinic. It's $15 for a visit. I would love to treat you in the student clinic. And I went and signed up for visits with her, and it was amazing and miraculous. And I couldn't even believe how cool acupuncture was. Like, it was the coolest thing that I'd ever experienced. Like, I just felt like, I could feel the energetic meridians in my body. I could feel things connecting that were supposed to be connecting. I would have the most amazing dreams on the table. I loved it. And I had 6 sessions with her. By the end of the sixth session, I had been breathing just fine, like, since the second session. And I mean, it gave me like so much relief. It was incredible. Like, I felt like it had healed my asthma, and I no longer identified as having asthma after that. And I was also like taking a lot of herbs. I was in herb school. I was taking licorice, which, in Chinese medicine, licorice, it supports the kidneys, which are, the kidney and adrenal gland are the same gland in Chinese medicine, which they probably should be in our system too. It's like the adrenal gland's a little hat on top of the kidney.
yeah.
We consider them totally separate, but they're the same organ, the kidney. So the kidney chi, was not strong enough to reach up and pull the rebellious lung chi down. So
Okay. Yeah.
licorice makes
And
the
kidneys like fire, right?
kidney is water, and kidney's
Oh,
the seat
kidneys
of
water.
terror, and kidney's
Oh,
primordial energy. We should have Kate talk about this, because
we will have Kate. We will
yeah,
definitely have Kate on.
I'm total like wannabe acupuncturist, but I'm not
That's
in this
cool.
lifetime. But I love the system of medicine. So
Me
I
too.
loved that idea of, it helps the kidneys reach up and pull the rebellious lung chi down, to ground it down, to get the full chi flowing through the lungs. So I was taking a lot of licorice. I was taking mullein. I was taking horehound and grindelia. I was doing like just a lot of long herbs. I really started seeing a counselor again to deal with my grief. So now that I'd had a baby, and had a natural birth at home, well, actually at my friend Kitty's house, who was sheltering me because I was like a homeless single mother, so I had a baby, surrounded by love, in my own power, and I had bonded with my baby and experienced what I had missed coming in, and was just feeling deeper levels of understanding just how badly my mom and I got ripped off, and how
Yeah.
it wasn't her fault that we didn't get along. There was nothing wrong with my mother. There was nothing wrong with me. Our birth process had been so dysfunctional that we didn't have a chance. Like, we just didn't have a chance, and so having healed, like repaired that through a natural birth, and understanding what I had missed, I was ready to go deeper with my grief, and I was better at crying, and I was better at feeling. I mean, honestly, what Rachel did for me, like, set the template where I can't tell that story without expressing grief anymore. Like, it's she really, like, that Rachel really helped heal me too. So yeah, from that point on, I would wheeze when I got sick. Like, if I got really sick, I would have a lot of wheezing, but I no longer viewed it as asthma. I viewed it as my lungs get easily inflamed when I'm sick. And I was still sometimes using medication, and I didn't feel comfortable not having an inhaler around just in case. And so, but I no longer identified as asthmatic that much. Like, I was like, oh, like sometimes it would come up for me as an identity, but I felt like the acupuncture had healed me. And then so every 2 years, I was getting like a bad respiratory infection, having a lot of wheezing, using the drugs because I was scared. When I was 34, so 10 years later, I got whooping cough, and oh
Ugh.
my God, that was crazy. Like, I would have so much rather had that when I was 5 than when I was 34, 35. My kids got whooping cough, and they did fine. Like, they really
Right.
fine. I coughed until I vomited. I coughed until I peed on myself. I coughed until I thought I was going to die for 4 months. And I
Ugh.
just coughed and coughed and coughed. And I remember lying in bed at one point because I'd like picked up some other respiratory virus on top of this whooping cough that I've had for months. And thinking like, this is going to go one of two ways. I am either going to get better or I'm going to die, because I cannot get any sicker than I am right now. I could barely breathe. And I called my friend Alyssa Gillespie, who's another amazing healer. And I was just feeling so down and out. I was like, I just don't know what to do. Do I need to go to the hospital? I have whooping cough. And Alyssa is a huge believer in nature cure, of how an acute illness will mobilize the vitality necessary to undo any areas where you're developing or have a chronic illness. And it's a blessing to have a really strong acute illness, because it means you have enough vitality to express that way. So when you've healed, you've really healed. Like, an acute illness is a gift.
Yes, what a
And
good reframe.
yeah. And I'd heard my nature cure friends talk about that. I had some of that mentality myself, but Alyssa like lives and breathes it. And she was such a dear friend of mine, and I trusted her so much. And she'd been such a healer for me on other things. Like, she's just an amazing practitioner of her modalities. And I called her as a friend and was like, I feel like I'm going to die. Like, I really am scared. I feel like maybe I should go to the hospital, because I really can't breathe and I'm just coughing so much. And she's like, you have whooping cough. She's like, oh, Mary Lou, that is like such a gift. Like, you have whooping cough. And I was like, what do you mean? I feel really miserable, and I don't feel blessed. And she's like, oh, you're clearing out all of the like toxicity from all the medication of suppressing the suppressive medications you've had, every respiratory infection you've ever had your whole life. And you, she's like, oh, Mary Lou, this is the key to you to healing so deeply. And then she said things like, this is probably why you're never going to get cancer. This is probably adding decades to your life, because you are having to mobilize so much vitality, and all that vitality you're mobilizing will be a part of you for the rest of your life. And she just like, hypnotized me into like believing whooping cough was like the best thing that ever happened to me.
What a gift.
Yeah, totally. And then she said, in the midst of all of that, she's like, this is what's going to finally heal your asthma.
Oh.
And she gave me the number of a homeopath in town, Deborah Roberts, who was married to Deborah Stevens, who was married to Robert Stevens, who ran a natural healing school here, who was a homeopath. And I had a big block to homeopathy. Like, I did not believe in homeopathy. I was a scientist in many ways still. Homeopathy didn't make sense to me. Like, it's sugar pills. Like, what do you mean energetic vibration? Like, I had a lot of dogma around thinking homeopathy was bullshit, basically. And I was so sick, and I trusted Alyssa so much. I was willing to do anything. I went to see Deborah, and she was scared. She wanted me, I could see she was scared of me. She wanted me to go to the hospital. She was like, I think you need to see a real doctor. I was really sick. I was really sick. And I was like, look, I understand I could go see a real doctor. Like, I am not unaware that that's available to me. My understanding is they don't have a lot to give me except supportive therapy. I do not think I need oxygen right now. I do not think I need to be admitted to the hospital. I'm not quite that sick. I really want homeopathy, and I want homeopathic pertussin. That's what I want, because there is a special homeopathy that is the homeopathic remedy of pertussis that only certified, like, registered homeopaths can access. Like, you have to be like a real homeopath to get it. And she gave it to me, and I took that, and I started feeling better right away. Like, I just stopped. I was still pretty sick, but I stopped coughing so much within like 6 hours of taking it. I was like, whoa, like, I'm getting better. Like, I don't even want to believe it, because there's a piece of me that like, this is my final place to prove that homeopathy doesn't work, or I still have rigidity around that. And by the next morning, it was unquestionable that I was finally getting, up to that point, I felt I was getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And I really turned the corner, literally. And then I went and I did a week-long bodywork training with Deborah's husband, with Robert Stevens. I did a core synchronism training where I just got and gave body work all day long for a week. And Robert was aware I was recovering from whooping cough, and he did a lot of work on me as well. and I was really starting to get better. And then my friend Terry Simmons, who is an amazing traditional midwife here in town, I ran into her and she's like, "Oh, you look like hell. What's going on?" I'm like, "I've been so sick for 4 months with whooping cough. I feel like I'm finally getting better, but I still feel really fragile." And she said, so I just had all these angels, who like came at this right time. Terry said, "You should go down to Truth or Consequences and soak in the waters down there. They have the most amazing waters. People have come there forever to heal. I feel like Truth or Consequences is where you need to go." And I love hot springs, but I'd never been to this little town. It's this little town in New Mexico that's literally called Truth or Consequences. So you definitely don't want to go there like with your clandestine affair, right? Like, like it's a place where
It's karmic.
yeah, it's totally karmic. It's like true, like be in your truth or you will suffer consequences, which makes it this amazing healing place. We have to like reckon with yourself. And the water coming up there has not been above ground in over 10,000 years.
Wow.
So I went to the hot springs there with my husband, Phil, with the intention of really finally healing from this whooping cough experience I've been having. And we soaked in those waters and it was amazing. Like those waters were incredible. And
Filled with minerals, right?
yeah, I mean, they're just magic. Like this, the energy of like this ancient water that hasn't been above ground for 10,000 years, and your body is there to meet it. And you're not like these were, it's used to be called Geronimo Springs. These were Geronimo's healing refuge springs, where his band of resistors would go and heal after battle and get vitality and get healing from the earth. Like these are amazing waters. And so we went and soaked there, and we were just there for like 2 days. And as we were leaving, I just felt like so good. I'm like, oh, I haven't coughed in like 6 hours, where I've been coughing a lot. And I as soon as I had that recognition, I looked in the mirror and suddenly like I was covered in eczema. I was just like, and in homeopathy, when something's dislodging, it comes out through the skin. And I had this like completely uninterrupted eczema from the top of my neck to the base of my rib cage, just huge,
basically hot, where your lungs were.
Yeah, this huge hot rash coming out of my lungs. I knew enough that I respected homeopathy then. I was like, okay, everything the homeopaths say is true is happening to me. So I went home and I took another dose of the homeopathic pertussin, and the rash went away in a day, which has never happened to me with eczema. Like usually my eczema outbreaks last a really long time. So the pertussin got rid of that final expression of it. And and I felt so much better. And then I'm going to fast forward to 5 years past that. So I'm in my late 30s, and I run into my friend Jill, who had been part of my play group where we all got whooping cough, and she was another asthmatic. Like she was another person identified as having asthma, and we got it the worst of anybody. Nobody else really got it. None of the other adults got it. Only Jill and I. Everyone else just got the sniffles. And yes, we were all vaccinated as children. Like we all had, everybody else in that group just got the sniffles. Jill and I got so sick. And I ran into her and I was like, oh yeah, that was crazy. Remember when we all had whooping cough? And she said, Mary Lou, I have not used my asthma inhaler since I recovered from whooping cough. And I just had this light bulb, ding, 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 ding. I'm like, you know what, Jill? Neither have I.
Wow.
And
that vitality mobilizing.
Totally. And I have been asthma free ever since. And I still sometimes would identify as an asthmatic until COVID hit, and the fear, and just this oh, if you have asthma, you're going to die of COVID. If you have asthma, you're going to die of COVID. And I was resonating with that. And I expressed it to my daughter, Willow, who's another amazing healer in my life. And she's like, Mama, you don't have asthma. I was like, what do you mean? I have asthma. And she's like, you need to just look at your life. Like you might have like had asthma in the past or symptoms of asthma in the past. She's like, but you haven't wheezed in over 15 years. You don't have asthma. So you don't need to think of yourself as someone with asthma. And that was my final layer of healing, of really letting it go of like, no, I don't have asthma. I am not asthmatic. I healed it.
That's
Um,
amazing.
yeah, it's gone. And I want other people to know it's possible. And I also know it's okay if it doesn't heal. Like we don't know what's going to happen, but healing is always in the realm of possibilities. And yeah, and I don't believe you have to get whooping cough to do it
No,
because I was
but it's
already,
one good way.
yeah, to me
Just
that
one
that was
method.
a big part of my process. Yeah. So that's my story.
I love your story so much. I want to go back to the story of your pregnancy and the
Mm,
opportunity that it offered to heal your matrilineal lineage, because, when you're describing being in your mother's womb and being, in the not only her amniotic fluid, but her fluid grief.
yes.
And yeah, just like swimming in that, and then your symptoms resurface around the time of your own pregnancy and immediately after giving birth. I mean, wow, like it's all coming to the surface to be experienced again.
Right.
And
Right.
right, like, I mean, it didn't get better, right? It didn't get better yet. It was just
No, it got
there to be
much, much worse.
re-experienced.
It
It
became
got
life-threatening.
worse.
It became life-threatening at that
Yes.
point. No, and it was really bad. I mean, I had to I I had to call an ambulance at one point. I was intubated, for my asthma. Like I had life-threatening asthma. Like I was really, really sick with asthma. And yes, that life-threatening aspect of it came up after, yeah, during my like after my pregnancy. I had a lot of stuff during my pregnancy, and then afterwards was when I was really, really sick. And yeah, it just, the layers of processing something like not bonding with your mom and
Well,
the yeah,
yeah, I mean, that's the thing that's so wild to me. Like there it didn't just threaten your life, it threatened your baby's life. So obviously when she was gestating, it threatened her life. But then if you were to die when she was just born, then she would, and you're a single mom, I mean, she could have gone into the system, but she could have just
yeah,
wasted away. She could have failed to thrive. And there was this huge kind of moment in that unfolding where you might have repeated the pattern of not being able to feed your baby because you're, bronchitis, and there's just this like moment where you could have repeated the pattern
yeah,
of your mother and failed to have a moment to bond with your daughter. And you
right.
didn't. You were able to transmute that. Not that you were able to heal it yet, clearly, because it persisted for so long, but that was a major turning point in like breaking that cycle that was started with your mom.
And it was a true like
Right?
healing crisis,
Yeah.
similar where the asthma had to get, I mean, the whooping cough got to. It was like I have to shift this or I'm going to die. Like this is going to kill me if I don't. My choices are I can get better or I'm going to die. And I didn't want to die of asthma. And again, seeing like understanding that the medical industry had nothing to offer me
Right.
except a lifetime of more and more drugs, and seeing that look in my doctor's eyes and understand, like I just knew like she thinks I'm going to die of asthma.
Which,
She
let's be
yeah,
clear, the drugs are not even palliative. Like they're weakening you. They were
yeah.
stimulants. They made you like strung out, essentially.
They may be strung out. The steroids make you more susceptible to infection. If you like
Exactly.
breathing
Yes.
in steroids into your lungs, it is very counterproductive. Like it lowers your local immune system in your lungs. That's why we're doing it. The immune system's
Right.
overreacting. That is the allopathic models understanding of what's happening in asthma. So what do? We put immunosuppressants directly. We have you inhale them and put them directly on the lung tissue. We are suppressing the localized immune system in the lungs. So of course, when you're on those drugs, you're getting more frequent and worse infections. Like all your infections are going into your lungs
Hmm.
because you don't have a strong localized immune system in your lungs because you're suppressing it every day.
Yes.
So yeah,
And
that was happening.
Yeah, and you know, when you got that secondary infection, like there you go. I mean, you have an infection already and the treatment is further lowering your immune system. Now you have another infection.
And then you're wheezing like crazy because you've got this major inflammation in your lungs from this infection. And that further reinforces your belief system that you have asthma, so you have
Yes.
weak lungs. So you have to take these medications that make your lungs weaker. And then it's not getting better. It's not a path to healing. It is
Mhm.
not a path to healing. Um, yeah, I mean, it was another gift. It was another, do or die experience of, you've got to make this decision. Are you gonna just keep getting sicker and sicker and probably die of this, or are you gonna get better? And luckily, because I live a blessed life, and I'm surrounded by wonderful people, like my angels were there for me. Like I had all the right healers show up for me, and I had a lot of intention to get better. I was really determined to get better because I not only, I had a baby I had to take care of.
Right. All by
And
yourself.
yeah, exactly, all by myself. And I was an apprentice midwife, and I had a calling, like I was on fire to
Yeah.
be a midwife, and I couldn't be a good midwife if I was, super sick.
Yeah. And you know, this is a kind of redirection, but I love that your response was to the original grief of your mother's um cancer and just you know, declining in front of you was to smoke more because like you said, grief lives in our lungs and it's almost like you're again, the wisdom of your body was to honor the thing that was most crying out for attention. And so even though smoking is not a good way to move grief out of the lungs, the attention that you're putting on the lungs by smoking is on an unconscious level answering that grief. And I really relate to that because in my life, every time I have gone through like a really tragic breakup or lost a loved one, I take up smoking. And I've never been addicted to smoking in the long term. I've had, it's always been something that I could pretty much put down. But if I'm in a state of grief, the thing that I itch
Mhm.
for a cigarette and I need it so bad. And yeah, I mean I've heard of people like smoking mullein, like rolling
Mhm.
up and smoking mullein, and that seems like a good a more positive way to treat grief, but like that kind of that thing that you reached for even though it was harming you was also medicinal in its way because it was like a physical honoring of the grief that was just festering in your lungs.
Absolutely. And I love tobacco. I think tobacco is such a sacred plant. I
Oh,
love
absolutely.
I love visiting it. I was just visiting my friend Suzanne, who I lived with in college. I'm so blessed that we remain friends. And I'm looking at her beautiful garden, and she had these gorgeous tobacco plants with the. I mean, it's just such a beautiful plant.
Yes, and it smells so good.
It's so sacred. And tobacco, like, what has tobacco always been used for? Um, to take your prayers to the heavens.
Yes.
You put your prayers in the tobacco, and it takes it to the heavens, to communicate with the ancestors
Yes.
and our spirit guides, and to make peace between people with very different belief systems.
Mm.
And anyone who's been a smoker knows that last one is very true, that
Yep.
yeah, like sit down and have a cigarette with anybody and your friends while you're smoking that cigarette. And just that smoking subculture that I sometimes miss. I Yeah, I mean, sometimes I'll work with tobacco as as ceremonial, offering tobacco. I very rarely will smoke a little bit of tobacco in ceremony, just you know if I'm in a ceremony that involves tobacco, it's medicine for me, and I feel okay about that. Sometimes I still use it that way, but it
That's
was
different than 2 packs a day. Let's
well,
just be
two
honest.
packs of Camel Lights a day. Yeah.
Right. It's
But when
different.
when I was feeling really hardcore Camel on filters, like those were my two
Uh-huh,
that I
girl.
alternated between. Um,
I rolled my own, so I
yeah,
know that unfiltered life.
yeah, the unfiltered life, and well, and all those chemicals and everything. And it was very hard to quit. Like, I do not want to sound cavalier. Like, it was hard for me to quit smoking. I
Mm-hmm.
was trying to quit smoking all the time. I tried all sorts of things. I I mean, I was like in a lot of psychology classes, and I would do these behavioral modification things where one was put a rubber band around your wrist and snap it every time you feel like smoking. That didn't work very well. Another was, oh, the one that worked pretty well for me was to wrap the cigarettes in a really beautiful piece of wrapping paper and a bow, and to have to undo it every time I had a cigarette as a like a present to myself. That brought me down to like 5 a day. Like that actually really helped. And then my friend Joey, she was a big time smoker too. And we were doing behavioral modification where we would start to limit where we could smoke. Like, I would tell myself, I can smoke anywhere I want, except in the car. That was one of my first ones, because I smoked a lot in the car. And once I got comfortable with that, like, it's like, okay, I don't smoke in the car anymore. It's like, okay, I can smoke anywhere or time I want, except after a meal.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to wait at least an hour after I eat. So taking those two out, where I wasn't like, I can have as many cigarettes as I want. I just can't have them in the car, and I can't have them within an hour after eating. So those were, smokers like to smoke after they
Huge
eat.
triggers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
huge. And
It's just
then,
habituated.
yeah, then it was like, okay, smoke anywhere I want, except in the car, after a meal, and at the Forum, which is the place on campus where we would all hang out and smoke. And then it got to the place where I had one place on campus I was allowed to smoke, that I could smoke. I could smoke as much as I want, but I had to walk over there and do it. And that got me down to like 1 a day.
Mm-hmm.
And I stayed at 1 a day for a long time. And really, it was getting pregnant that got me off entirely. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
just stopped smoking. I think I smoked like 3 cigarettes during that pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
And part was I was no longer like physically addicted. And I'd done most of the work already. And two was pregnancy, man. Like, you're repulsed by cigarettes and alcohol. Like, it is primal stuff. Like, you don't want poison. So healing my relationship with tobacco was enormous. And I still had so many lung issues. Even, I mean, thank God I wasn't still smoking. But then I was left without that grief medicine, right?
Yes. Right.
Which is
Yes.
probably why it got so much worse.
Yes.
Because I really was medicating my grief with the tobacco, which I think
I
most people who are
know.
smoking are doing.
Yeah. Yeah. I really think that. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely been true for me. I loved too your story about the acute illness and how it moves so much vitality, because I have had a lifelong allergy to cats. And I got this cat in college, and I was so allergic to him, and he made me he the constant sneezing led to a sinus infection, which led to pneumonia, and I thought the pneumonia was going to kill me. And at the end of my convalescence from pneumonia, I wasn't allergic to cats anymore.
Nice. Did you suppress the pneumonia, or did you take any suppressive
No, I
medication?
didn't. That was
Wow.
before I had insurance. So
Wow.
I went to the like on-campus nurse, and they were like, if you don't get rid of the cat, you're gonna die. And I was like, if I get rid of the cat, he's gonna die. So
Right.
I was 19, so I could make idiotic calculations like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have more vitality to mobilize. But
Oh, definitely.
I mean, this is something we should probably talk about in another episode, but I believe very strongly that when we suppress an acute illness, we don't get the same benefits
Yes.
of that vitality mobilization.
Mm-hmm.
That taking drugs, like taking suppressive medications, you lose a lot of that healing potential of the acute illness.
Yeah, I definitely want to dive into that much deeper on another episode. And it just triggered a memory of when you were talking about um, the bronchitis and the whooping cough, and the period with pertussis. I was just reminded of COVID, because we talked a lot during the COVID period about scar tissue in the lungs and scarring of the lungs. And I was just thinking about, you went through so many lung infections. I imagine you probably have scar tissue in your lungs.
I don't believe that.
Okay.
I think that someone with my history would be likely to have scar tissue in their lungs.
Right.
I don't believe,
If that's a
yeah,
thing. Right.
yeah. Absolutely.
That's kind of what I'm getting at. Cause like you don't have these bouts of asthma anymore. You don't
No,
have chronic lung infections the way you did when you were a little girl.
no, I don't. And it, my illnesses don't go into my lungs anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I've had COVID 3 times and it didn't, I mean, I guess the last time I had it, I did cough a lot, but I didn't wheeze. I haven't had a wheezing illness in a really long time. I haven't had an illness where I felt like I couldn't breathe, which used to be my baseline. If I was sick, I was on my way to feeling like I couldn't.
Yes.
And I tried to have so much compassion for that fear during COVID of like, oh,
Yes.
that is a scary thing. Not being able to breathe is so
So
scary.
scary.
And just what an awful way to die, to feel like you can't breathe. And I have felt that so many times in my life from some of my first memories of like, I feel like I can't breathe. And I was born, but I couldn't breathe when I was born because I was drugged. So it's very primal for me,
Mhm.
like not being able to
Yes.
breathe. Yeah.
Yeah, I know when I had brought up German new medicine earlier in the context of allergies, and I was thinking about that again because your story of your first breath being forced, in German new medicine, asthma is triggered by a death fright conflict. So the not being able to breathe is an expression of the fear that you won't be able to breathe, that you're dying,
Right.
right?
There you go. That was pretty strong.
Yeah, and you literally were like on you could have died, and the air was literally not coming into your lungs.
Well,
German.
I might have been born clinically dead. Like I don't know. I don't have any
Yeah.
records, but my mother, you were really good birthers in my family. Like we're just
Okay.
really good at giving birth. And my mom's first birth was, was under general anesthesia, but I think it was like 6 or 7 hours long. I was her second baby a year after her first
A
birth. Like
year.
she was going fast. Like, I mean, I inherited my body from my mother. I've given birth twice and I've been in labor less than 10 hours my whole life.
Hmm.
My daughter's had very efficient births. We're just really good at giving birth in my line,
Yeah.
which is a
Wow.
blessing. And I think
Wow.
I think a lot of women are from a line of women who are really good at giving birth. I don't think that's abnormal.
Hmm.
But what it is true is my mom was having her second baby she had just given birth like a year before. She was going fast and furious. She was given anesthesia a few minutes before I was born. So I
Ah.
probably was born needing a full resuscitation. I was probably born without a heart rate and without any respiratory effort. So I
Oh
was most likely fully resuscitated at my birth.
God. Man, that is really, really an intense way to come into this world.
And that the systems aversion to natural birth at the time, that they would treat like we have to do this. We have like the baby's coming out, but we got to get the anesthesia into you because you can't be conscious for your birth. Women were told it would damage them to be conscious for their births. They didn't, and they were separated from their family. My dad was given drink coupons for the bar
Right.
across the
Leave.
street.
Don't bother being
Yeah,
here.
don't, like, get out of here, go have some drinks. We'll call you when everybody's cleaned up. And yeah, it's crazy, right? That was sane. No one questioned it. And that we can look at that and be like, oh, that's crazy. But still, people can't look at our current medical protocols and understand that, in a few decades, we're going to view so much of this as crazy. Like we're always doing crazy stuff.
Yeah.
But that was the paradigm at the time. So yeah, I was born probably, I mean, it probably was born clinically dead. Like I probably didn't have
Yeah.
much going on. But because I was a baby and it was only a couple minutes into it, they got me going, and
Mhm.
I didn't need a ventilator or anything like that. I just needed to, the story that my mom understood from asking the nurses was I just needed to like be resuscitated and then I was okay.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. You also have Saturn in a square to your natal moon, and I just
Yeah.
think about like the constraint put on your mother
Yeah.
in that story, like the restrictions on your mother in her birth, and then the restrictions on the relationship with your mother for the rest of your life.
Yeah, until my mother died.
And yeah.
And that if my mother had not given me the gift of dying when I was 21, I would still be fighting with my mother.
Oh my gosh.
And that is a really hard piece of my grief process, that my mother's death was such a liberation for me, that we could finally bond and that I could stop reacting to her. And it was not that so much to my brother and sister, who really bonded well with my mother and had these really wonderful relationships with my mom. It was a much more tragic, and it's tragic for me, but it was also this enormous gift. Like, I could not have become a healthy person in my 20s if my mother hadn't died when I was 21. And in hindsight, that's the truth of my story. And
Yeah.
because we had such a dysfunctional, reactive relationship, I would have just been reacting to her all the time. Everything happened, in hindsight, I believe in my life, everything makes sense. And I'm not glad or happy my mom died. I just recognize the gift of it in the mythic story that is my life.
Absolutely. It really makes sense. And when you say that you would still be fighting, I wonder if that's actually true, because you are such a healer and you're so oriented toward evolution. But I also recognize the wisdom. I mean, your life, and so that you know receptivity to the gift of her death is allows it to be a blessing, and allows it to be the motivation for you to go back to school and to become the type of mother that your mother didn't have the chance to be.
Right. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know who I would be if I had not been tasked with these literally like Herculean efforts of
Yes.
you have to do your mother's hospice care at 20. You have to go back to college before your mom has actually died. And then also to be a single mother, was a very Herculean thing, to apprentice as a midwife as a single mother. These things that don't seem humanly possible,
Yeah.
that were required of me in my story. I don't know who I would be, and I don't regret any of it. And yeah, it did temper me. So yeah, I'm really grateful to my mother. I have a lot of love for my mother. I really try to remember to uh invoke my mother's intercession as a saint, that my
Yes.
mother is still an ally for me, like in the ancestral realm. It's hard because we didn't bond well, that I didn't have a strong personal relationship with my mother. So most of um like, I really would have liked to know my mother better than I did.
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
I do have to give my mother like huge credit, that she still really wanted a natural birth. And when she got pregnant with my brother, my mom was a nurse. She was savvy. She wanted natural birth. She knew in this little town in Pennsylvania, they were not doing natural births there. That wasn't like the big city where that Lamaze stuff was happening. You couldn't do that there. It was not allowed. When she went into labor with my brother, she didn't tell my dad, and she asked him to take her out to dinner, and she ate and ate and ate. And then she was like, "You got to get to the hospital. I'm like gonna have the baby soon." And she, when they came out, she was like, "You can't give me anesthesia. My stomach is so full." Like, she had a
Yes.
natural birth with my brother.
Oh,
She
yes.
planned it that way. Like, I don't know how long she planned it, but I have a feeling she was planning
Yeah.
that for a while.
She's a fucking hero.
Yeah, that she got a natural
Yes.
birth. She got a natural birth. She got an unmedicated birth with my brother because of it.
Wow, that is so cool. I
Yeah.
admire her. I also am curious because you said that she had melanoma, right? And it had
Yes.
spread throughout her body. I mean, melanoma is a skin cancer, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And you had eczema. So not that eczema is in on par with melanoma, but I'm making a comparison in the expression, because we were talking about how disease rises to the surface of the skin when it's ready to be healed. And so,
Mhm.
I wonder if the grief that she was carrying, I know that she lost her sister. I imagine that there were other big tragedies in her life, just based on what little I know about your family background. But I wonder if that that was her, the rising to the surface of her healing crisis.
Yeah, it's hard to know what my mom's like how she would put together her
Mm-hmm.
story as a mythic journey. But I'll
Yeah.
tell you one really cool thing is my mom and my dad, they met each other they were both close to 40. They were in their late 30s, and they had both had these really interesting lives. So my mom had been in the convent for a very long time. She had been a nun, and she left the convent because she wanted to have children and a family. And my dad had been in a circus, like traveling around with the circus.
That's
My
right.
mom was in the convent. My dad was in the circus. My dad had left the circus and was doing other things. He was actually a chick sexer at a time. He was like a professional chicken sexer. So he
Yeah.
had this like really kind of itinerant wild life. And they had a mutual friend who just thought they'd get along, even though my mom was a very devout Catholic. My dad was kind of this unchurched guy. My dad had a wild past. My mom had spent her whole youth in a convent, and they met each other and they fell in love. Like the first time they met each other, they fell in love. And within like a few weeks, they decided to get married because they're in their late 30s. They both want a family. It's a different time. Like there were not long courtships there,
Mm-mm.
like if you wanted a family, you got married. And
Get
you wanted,
started.
and honestly, in my lineage, especially my mom's, like if you wanted to have sex, you got married, right? So if you were
Uh-huh.
really into someone, you get married. And so they announced they were getting married. And the day after, or like within a week after getting engaged, my mom was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. And
Wow.
and she didn't have any insurance. And my dad, who was so in love with her, he paid for all her treatment. She had surgery, she had her thyroid removed. And she woke up from surgery and she said to him, you probably don't want to marry me. I'm probably
Oh.
not going to live very long. And and my dad said to her, even if I just have one day with you, I want to marry you.
Oh, that is
And
so
it was so
romantic.
romantic. They loved each
Oh.
other so much. They were so in love. And my mom's story was she prayed to Jesus and to Mary and Joseph. And she prayed to God that she could have children and see them all graduate from high school.
Oh,
And she died of cancer when my brother, her youngest, was a freshman in college.
wow. God answers prayers.
God answers prayers. She probably should have
Ah,
asked for, maybe to
a
see her
little more
grandchildren or
time.
something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was a miracle. So my mom was sick. We were very aware that my mom had a lot of cancers, and then it
Mhm.
was the colon cancer and the melanoma, that one of those is what metastasized. But we grew up with a sick mom. Like I mean, she wasn't looking physically sick, but she felt like her days were numbered our whole time together, and we picked up on that.
Wow.
But it is such a
Like she
beautiful
was
love
living on
story.
borrowed time.
She felt that way, yeah, she
Yeah.
did. And and it was also like the Notebook or something, like this love story. My
Yes.
parents had this love story that was a big part of our family story, that
Yeah.
they loved each other, and that they like had this pact together, that they like that she had survived so they could have this family together. And yeah,
Hmm.
anyway, that's more of
I
my
love your mother. Oh, yeah. I love your father too. I just am so happy they found each
I
other.
I'm really glad they found each other too.
Oh,
Yeah,
here
and
you
this is what
are.
happens. Like this is what happens when um a nun and a guy who's been in the circus have kids.
Mary Lou happens.
Totally, get something like this.
Uh,
So yeah.
yeah, she
So-
seems so serious, and yet secretly she is a jester.
and like just pious and irreverent and all of
Uh-huh,
it. Yeah.
pious and irreverent. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. That is you so
So
much.
that's my story.
Do you feel complete?
I feel complete. There are more
Yeah.
things I'd love to talk about too, that just because like in future episodes, I absolutely want to talk about healing from adenomyosis and perimenopausal flooding, because I think that's something that
Whoa.
we don't get enough stories of. But for the
Yeah.
purpose of this
The
this
asthma
podcast
container.
episode, I think that's my story, that I healed. I no longer have asthma. I do not identify as having asthma. I that's no longer part of who I am.
you're free.
I'm free from that.
Yeah, I totally want to validate what you're saying too, because we're gonna have so many episodes, Mary Lou, and I was editing the second episode today, which was my story, and I was like, gosh, I can't believe I got through an entire episode about my healing journey and never mentioned that I took up strength training and how it completely and radically accelerated my healing journey. Didn't even
Mhm.
mention it. So yeah, we're gonna have to dive deep into a lot of issues. But how could you possibly tell? Like you said when we began this, you've been healing your whole life.
Mhm.
So this is just one chapter in that.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
Mhm.
Right. Well, thank you so much for listening to my story. And I do want to thank my mom,
Mhm.
my patron saint, I feel here.
Yeah.
My mom's name was Dorothy Carmel Carol Singleton. She was her birth name was Carol, her Irish name, and Dorothy, and then Carmel is named after Our Lady of Mount Carmel, who was a very blessed apparition of the Divine Mother.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
so
And
thank you, Mom.
doesn't it mean city of God too, I think,
It
or I don't
might,
know,
it might.
something like that. L is God. Anyway, I love your story so much, Mary Lou. Thank you so much for sharing it and being so vulnerable and honest with us.
Thank you, Jocelyn.
So I'll just say to wrap up, once again, thank you to our audience for listening, and we hope that you will subscribe to our Substack to stay abreast of all of our latest updates and our latest episodes as they drop. We do have a paid option. We would really love your support. It helps to maintain the energy that we need to go through the recording and editing and advertising of this podcast. And so we would really appreciate your support, whether you're a free subscriber or on our paid tier. And I also want to say once again that if you have a story of healing, then we would really love for you to get in touch with us. Our email is howihealedpodcast@gmail.com. You can reach us on Instagram, Twitter, Threads, Notes, Facebook, and we'll put all those handles in the notes. So get in touch. Thank
Thanks.
you. That was a great app.